My phone buzzed at 6:47 in the morning, and I almost let it go to voicemail because I had a deposition at 9 and I hadn't even finished my coffee yet. I'm Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie, and I'd been working as a corporate attorney in Charlotte for almost 7 years at that point. 31 years old, single. The kind of woman who color codes her closet and pays her bills 3 days early because chaos makes my skin crawl. I picked up the phone and saw a group text from my mother. 3 little dots, then a photo. It was a picture of her, my father, my older brother Wesley, his wife Tiffany, and their 2 kids, all crammed into what looked like a hotel lobby. Palm trees in the background. Wesley was holding up a margarita glass like he was toasting the camera. My mother had written, "Surprise! Family vacation to Key West. We pulled from the joint account for the deposit and a few extras. You're such a sweetheart for being so generous." Haha, hope you don't mind, sweetie. I stared at that message for a long time, long enough that my coffee got cold in my hand, long enough that the dog walker rang the doorbell twice before I remembered to let her in. See, the joint account was something I'd opened with my parents about 4 years earlier, when my dad had his first heart scare, and my mother said she was overwhelmed trying to manage their bills while he recovered. It started small. I'd put money in to cover their mortgage one month when the medical bills hit harder than expected. Then it became routine. Every month I'd deposit my contribution. They'd add what they could, and together we'd handle the house payment, the utilities, the insurance. The deal was clear. That account was for the house, for keeping the home I grew up in from going underwater while my dad recovered. Except my dad recovered 3 years ago, and the account kept going. Because every time I brought it up, my mother would cry and say things were tight, that she didn't want to lose the house, that I was the only one who could help. My brother Wesley owned a construction company, but he was always between jobs or waiting on a check. Tiffany hadn't worked since their first kid was born, so I just kept putting money in. Month after month after month. I'd been putting in about $3,800 a month for almost 4 years. I'm not stupid. I know how that sounds. But here's the thing nobody understands until they're in it. When you grow up in a family where love comes with conditions, where you're the one who fixes things, where your worth is measured by how useful you are, you don't see the pattern until somebody hands you a photograph of them drinking margaritas in Key West with your money. I read the message again. Then I scrolled up and saw that the photo had been sent to a group chat that included Wesley and Tiffany. They'd both reacted with laughing emojis. Wesley had written, "She doesn't even check it, LOL. Easy money." Tiffany had written, "I told you she wouldn't notice. She makes plenty." My mother had replied, "Don't be mean, girls. She loves helping family." Shh. Loves helping family. I sat at my kitchen table and I felt something inside me go very still. Not angry. Not sad. Just still. The way water gets right before it freezes. I poured my cold coffee down the sink, made a fresh cup, and opened my laptop. I logged into the joint account. The balance was $47.16. 3 weeks earlier, before my last deposit, it had been close to $12,000. That deposit, plus what was already there, plus another $4,000 my parents had supposedly added for the property taxes that month, had all been pulled out in withdrawals over the past 6 days. Hotel charges, airline tickets, a restaurant called Sloppy Joe's, a jet ski rental company, a boutique on Duval Street. I scrolled back further and further, and what I found made my stomach turn over. For the last 14 months, my parents had stopped contributing to the account entirely, not a single deposit from them. But the withdrawals had increased. There were charges I'd never noticed because I never looked. A spa in Asheville, a jewelry store, 2 cruise deposits that had eventually been refunded, a down payment on something at a Chevrolet dealership last August that had been refunded a week later when I'd happened to mention I was tight on cash that month. They'd panicked and put it back. I remembered my mother calling me crying that month, telling me she was scared about the mortgage. I'd sent extra. Of course I'd sent extra. I closed my laptop. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes. Then I called my office and told them I was taking a personal day. The first thing I did was call my friend Bianca, who I'd gone to law school with and who now ran her own family law practice in Raleigh. I told her everything. I didn't cry. I didn't even raise my voice. I just laid it out, start to finish, and at the end she was quiet for a long moment before she said, "Maggie. Honey. You need a forensic accountant and you need one yesterday, but first you need to freeze that account. Right now. Today. Before they get back from Key West." So that's what I did. I drove to the bank where the joint account was held. It was a small regional bank that my parents had used for decades. I sat down with the branch manager, a woman named Patricia who had worked there since I was a teenager, who had known my parents for 30 years. I showed her the text message. I showed her the bank statements. I showed her the pattern of withdrawals. I told her I wanted to freeze the account immediately and that I needed copies of every transaction for the past 4 years. Patricia's face changed as I talked. She got very quiet, and then she said something I will never forget. She said, "Honey, I'm so sorry. I should have called you. We've had concerns about that account for a while. Your mother has been in here several times trying to get the daily withdrawal limit raised. She told us it was to help you. She told us you were going through a divorce." I'm not married. I've never been married. I had Patricia print out everything, every statement, every transaction, every signature card. And then I had her freeze the account effective immediately, requiring both my signature and a court order to unfreeze. Patricia walked me through it personally. She kept apologizing, even though it wasn't her fault. I told her she was kind to care, and I meant it. Then I drove home and started making a list. I made a list of every dollar I'd put into that account. I made a list of every withdrawal I could identify as theirs. I made a list of every promise they'd ever made to me about helping with the house, every claim they'd made about contributing, every time my mother had cried on the phone about being scared of losing their home. I pulled up my old text messages. I pulled up emails. I had years of receipts. Then I called Bianca back and told her I wanted to know exactly what my options were. She gave it to me straight. The joint account was legally accessible to all three of us, so technically my parents hadn't committed theft just by withdrawing money. But there was a paper trail of fraudulent representations. There were text messages where my mother had explicitly stated funds were going to the mortgage when they weren't. There were the bank conversations where she'd lied about my circumstances. There was a pattern of financial exploitation that, depending on the state and how it was framed, could be classified as elder abuse in reverse, or simply civil fraud. The bigger issue, Bianca said, was that I had a strong civil case for recovery and possibly punitive damages, and depending on what the forensic accountant found, there might be more. She also asked me a question that broke me a little. She asked, "Maggie, have you ever actually checked who's been paying their mortgage?" I hadn't. Why would I? My money was going into the joint account, and the joint account was paying the mortgage. That was the whole point. Bianca pulled some strings and got me an introduction to a forensic accountant named Glenda, who was probably 65 and looked like she could intimidate a tax auditor into tears. I hired her that afternoon. She asked me for everything I had and told me she'd have a preliminary report in a week. In the meantime, I went silent. I didn't reply to my mother's text. I didn't answer her calls when they started coming 3 days later. I didn't respond to Wesley's "Ooh, live sis" message. I didn't engage with Tiffany's passive-aggressive Facebook post about how some people in the family just couldn't be happy for others. I let them sit in their Key West hotel and wonder why I wasn't laughing along. On day 5, my mother called 14 times. On day 6, my father called for the first time in 8 months. He left a voicemail that said, "Margaret, your mother is very upset. Whatever this is, it's gone on long enough. Call us back. We're family." His voice was that mix of stern and aggrieved that I knew from childhood. The voice he used when something he wanted wasn't being delivered fast enough. On day 7, Glenda called me with the preliminary report. The mortgage on my parents' house had not been paid for 16 months. They were 6 payments away from foreclosure. The bank had been sending notices. My mother had been intercepting them. They had not been using my money for the mortgage. They had not been using my money for the utilities, which were also significantly behind. They had been using my money for travel, for restaurants, for clothing, for Wesley's truck payment, for Tiffany's monthly facial appointments, for a storage unit full of things I would later discover were impulse buys from QVC. They had spent, by Glenda's careful calculation, approximately $183,000 of my money on things that had nothing to do with the survival of the family home. Meanwhile, the family home was about to be auctioned off. I cried for the first time then. Not for the money. For the fact that my parents had been so committed to the lie that they'd let their own house slide into foreclosure rather than tell me the truth. For the fact that they'd sat in that house every night watching the eviction day crawl closer and still kept spending. For the fact that on some level they must have believed I would save them again. That I would always save them. Because I always had. Glenda asked me what I wanted to do. I told her I needed 24 hours to think. I thought about it. I thought about my whole life. I thought about being 7 years old and being told I was the responsible one, the smart one, the one who didn't need as much. I thought about Wesley breaking my bike and being told boys will be boys. I thought about working 2 jobs through law school while Wesley dropped out of community college twice and my parents took out a home equity loan to bail him out. I thought about every birthday card that said, "We're so proud of you, hope you don't mind, we couldn't send anything this year, money's tight." While my mother posted photos of new patio furniture on Facebook, I thought about my father saying, "We're family." The next morning, I called Bianca and I told her I wanted to file everything. The civil suit for recovery of funds, the request for an emergency court order to keep them from accessing any other accounts of mine, and a request for a restraining order that would prevent my mother from contacting me except through counsel. I wanted documentation. I wanted a paper trail. I wanted the truth of what they had done to me to exist in a courthouse somewhere where they couldn't pretend it never happened. And then I made one more decision. I told Bianca I wanted to do something else, and I wanted her to walk me through whether it was legal. I wanted to let the house go. For 4 years, I had been propping up that mortgage. For 16 months, they had been pretending I still was. The house, legally, was theirs, not mine. I had no obligation to it. None. If I stopped sending money, if I let the foreclosure proceed, my parents would lose the house in approximately 6 weeks. Bianca was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Maggie, that's not illegal. That's just you deciding to stop being a bottomless wallet for people who laughed at you in a group chat. Whether you can live with it is up to you. But you have every right to do it." I thought about my mother in that hotel lobby. The margarita, the I could live with it. On day 8, while my parents were still in Key West, the bank notified them that their joint account had been frozen. I know this because that was the day my mother called me 41 times in a row. Then Wesley called. Then Tiffany. Then my father. The voicemails got progressively more unhinged. My mother started crying in one of them, saying I was destroying the family, that they had emergencies, that they couldn't even pay for their hotel room because the card on file had been linked to the joint account. I didn't answer. On day 9, they apparently scraped together enough on Wesley's credit card to fly home. My mother showed up at my apartment building at 11 at night. The doorman called me. I told him to tell her I wasn't home. He's a good man, that doorman. He didn't even hesitate. On day 10, I was served by my own mother. She had gone to the courthouse and filed something herself, some kind of pro se complaint that didn't really make sense legally, but accused me of stealing the joint account funds and abandoning the family home. Bianca actually laughed when she read it. She said it was going to make my case easier, because it forced everything into the legal system on my terms. On day 12, my counterfiling went through, the civil suit for recovery of $183,000, the documented evidence of fraudulent misrepresentation, the forensic accountant's report, the text messages, the bank manager's affidavit, all of it. I filed in Charlotte, where I had legal residency. I made sure my parents would have to come to me. On day 14, my mother showed up at my office. She didn't get past the lobby. My building has good security, and Bianca had already sent over a formal cease and desist. My mother stood in the lobby and screamed at the receptionist for 20 minutes. Apparently, she told everyone within earshot that her daughter was a heartless monster who was trying to put her elderly parents on the street. She told them I was unstable. She told them I had always been jealous of my brother. She told them I needed help. I watched it on the security camera from my office on the 18th floor. I watched my mother, the woman who had taught me to tie my shoes, the woman who had braided my hair before recitals, the woman who had taught me how to write thank you notes. I watched her scream at a 23-year-old receptionist named Megan, because Megan wouldn't let her up to my floor. And I felt something that surprised me. I felt sorry for her. Not enough to do anything about it, but enough to understand, for the first time, that she was not going to change, that she had built her whole identity on a story where she was the good mother and I was the difficult daughter, and there was no version of reality I could present that would make her see herself clearly. The story was too important to her. More important than me. I went home that night and I let myself grieve. Properly. I cried until my eyes were swollen, and I called Bianca, and she came over with takeout and sat on my couch with me, while I told her every memory I had of my mother that was actually good, the ones I was going to have to put in a box on a high shelf and not look at for a long time. Bianca didn't try to make me feel better. She just sat there. That's what real love looks like, I think. Just sitting there. The case took 8 months to resolve. In that time, my parents lost the house. It went to auction in early spring. I drove past it once just to see. The yard was overgrown. There were 2 trucks in the driveway that I didn't recognize. A new family had bought it for less than it had been worth 10 years earlier. I sat in my car across the street for a few minutes, and I said goodbye to it. To the porch where I'd had my first kiss. To the bedroom window where I used to sneak out. To the kitchen where my mother had once made me cinnamon toast when I was homesick with chickenpox. Then I drove away. Wesley and Tiffany had taken my parents in for a few months. From what I heard secondhand, it had not gone well. Tiffany apparently could not handle living with my mother. There were screaming matches. Wesley got tired of mediating. They moved my parents into a rental apartment, a small 2-bedroom in a complex that was definitely a step down from the house. Wesley was paying for it, at least at first, and complaining loudly to anyone who would listen. I heard about most of this from my cousin Hadley, who had always quietly been on my side, and who had decided to break the family code of silence the day my mother told her I had stolen the family inheritance. Hadley called me and said, "Maggie, I've watched this for years. I'm sorry I never said anything. Let me know if you need a witness." She showed up to the deposition voluntarily. She told them everything she'd seen. She was magnificent. The judgment came down in October. The court found that my parents had committed civil fraud through repeated misrepresentation of how funds in the joint account would be used. They were ordered to repay $171,000, with the rest classified as legitimate joint expenses that I had not been able to fully document. They didn't have it, obviously. They didn't have any of it. But the judgment was placed against any future assets, including any inheritance my mother was due to receive from her own mother, who was elderly and unwell. The court also issued a permanent no-contact order from my mother to me since she had violated the temporary one 3 times during the proceedings. I didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. But I did do one thing. After the judgment, I took the day off and I drove out to a little lake about an hour outside Charlotte. I brought a thermos of coffee and a sandwich and a book. I sat by the water for 6 hours and I did absolutely nothing. I listened to the wind. I watched a heron stand perfectly still in the shallows and then explode upward with a fish in its beak. I thought about how much of my life I had spent being useful to people who would never have done the same for me. And I thought about how many years I had left if I was lucky. 50 maybe. 50 years to fill with something else. I went back to work the next day, and I called a financial advisor and I made a plan. I started a real retirement account, the kind I should have started in my 20s. I bought a small condo 6 months later in a neighborhood I loved, with a view of the trees. I got a dog, a rescue mutt named Cooper, who is the love of my life and who follows me from room to room like he's afraid I'll disappear. I went to therapy twice a week for 2 years. I learned slowly what it felt like to spend money on myself without feeling guilty. I learned what it felt like to say no without explaining. I don't talk to my parents. I don't talk to my parents. I don't talk to Wesley. Tiffany sent me a long, apologetic message about a year after the judgment, which Bianca said I should not respond to under any circumstances. So I didn't. I heard through Hadley that my father's health is poor, and that my mother has told everyone who will listen that I am the reason. I imagine that will be on her tombstone someday. Mother of an ungrateful daughter. It is not my problem anymore. What I want to tell you, if you are someone who recognizes yourself in any of this, is that there is a particular kind of grief that comes with realizing the people who were supposed to love you the most were actually just using you. It does not feel like other grief. It does not have stages. It comes in waves, sometimes years apart, and then you'll smell a perfume in a grocery store, or hear a song your mother used to hum, and you'll have to pull over and just sit for a while. But it gets quieter, and in the spaces where they used to live, in your bank account and your phone and your head, something else grows, something that belongs to you. Mine looks like a condo with a tree view, a dog who snores on my feet, a savings account that's actually mine, and a small group of people including a doorman named Frank and a forensic accountant named Glenda and a friend named Bianca who showed up for me in ways my own family never did. The morning my mother sent that text from Key West, I thought I was about to have the worst day of my life. Turns out it was the day I started having a life that was actually mine. The ha-ha she sent thinking I'd just absorb the cost the way I always did. That ha-ha was the sound of her door closing on the version of me that would let her do it. I closed the door behind me. I locked it. And I haven't looked back since. Looking back on it now, more than a year after the judgment, I can see the whole shape of what happened. And I understand it differently than I did in the moment. None of this was random. Every choice my parents made, every laugh in that group chat, every withdrawal Wesley and Tiffany rationalized away, all of it grew out of soil I had been quietly fertilizing for years. When you teach people that you will always say yes, they stop hearing the cost. When you absorb the consequences of other people's choices over and over again, you don't create love, you create entitlement. That is the law of it. Cause and effect, as steady as gravity. I think a lot about the woman I was at 27 when I opened that joint account. She wasn't weak, she was loyal. She believed that loving people meant carrying them when they couldn't carry themselves. But somewhere along the way, I confused loyalty with self-erasure. I confused being needed with being loved, and the moment I confused those two things, the people around me started treating me accordingly. That wasn't their morality failing in a vacuum. It was my boundaries failing first. What I want anyone listening to understand is that integrity is not just about how you treat other people. It is also about how you allow other people to treat you. Letting someone harm you year after year, calling it kindness, is not a virtue. It is a slow surrender of the self you were supposed to become. My mother didn't see me as a person anymore by the end. She saw me as a resource, and I had taught her to. The intelligence I had to grow was the kind that looks honestly at a situation and refuses to flinch. Bianca couldn't have helped me if I had kept lying to myself about what the bank statements were saying. Glenda couldn't have built a case if I had kept softening the truth about my mother. Wisdom, the real kind, is willing to be uncomfortable. It is willing to grieve. It is willing to lose people who were never actually with you. And the strength, the part I'm most proud of, is the quietest part. It wasn't in the lawsuit. It was in choosing every morning for 8 months to not pick up the phone, to not write the apology I didn't owe, to let the house go, to sit with the grief of who my mother was never going to be, and to keep walking anyway. That kind of strength isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up, day after day. Until one morning you wake up and realize the ache is smaller, and there is room in your chest for something new. If you take anything from my story, take this. You are allowed to stop bleeding for people who are wounding you on purpose. That is not cruelty. That is the beginning of becoming someone whose life actually belongs to her.